All right, so today I'm going to talk about a couple changes in between the Lord of the Rings novel and the films. And I should start off by saying that I'm by no means a Lord of the Rings expert. Um, there's a lot with respect to the language and the pronunciations that I am not terribly good at, but I've from watching the films, I've always enjoyed them. I've watched them many times, and from reading the novel, and seeing these changes, a couple of which I want to talk about today. Although there are a number that I've seen, has spurred a topic of discussion that I think is important. So, having said that. One of the changes that I want to talk about is when Frodo is being. This is in the Fellowship of the Ring in both the book and in the novel and in the film, and Frodo's being followed by the nine dark riders, the Nazgul. The Ringwraiths, and this is after he's been stabbed, and Strider / Aragorn, and Sam and Merry and Pippin are with him, and in the film, Arwen, which is Aragorn's elf love interest, is the one who sort of comes to the rescue at that point. They're being followed, and Frodo needs immediate attention from someone who's experienced with healing in someone who's been stabbed in the manner that he was. So in the films, it's Arwen, and she picks him up on her white horse, and they ride off, and there's thematic music, and it's a powerful scene in the movie, in the Fellowship of the Ring itself, but it's also a powerful and memorable scene in the trilogy altogether. She pretty much comes to the rescue and saves Frodo. That's a pretty big change from the novels, where there's pretty much a character that's completely excluded. His name is Glorfindel. He's an elf, a powerful elf who has a history from the Elder Days and is formidable. And he's the one who comes to the rescue, but only to a point. He helps Frodo temporarily, and then ultimately it's Frodo who is alone on the white horse, and who's being followed by the nine Ringwraiths. So let's see, if we go to page 213, the chapter's Flight to the Ford, which is on the way to Rivendell. "Ride forward, ride," cried Glorfindel to Frodo. He did not obey at once, for a strange reluctance seized him. And then jumping on, again he says down below, ride on," cried Glorfindel. He cried to the horse in the elf tongue. At once the horse sprang away and sped like the wind along the last lap of the road. At the same moment the black horses leaped down the hill in pursuit, and from the riders came a terrible cry such as Frodo had heard, filling the woods with horror in the East Farthing far away. Frodo looked back for a moment over his shoulder. He could no longer see his friends. The riders behind were falling back. Even their great steeds were no match in speed for the white elf horse of Glorfindel. Jumping down further, Frodo, he's still in pursuit. Frodo heard the splash of water. This is as he's approaching him. So he comes to the water. It foamed about his feet. He felt the quick heave and surge as the horse left the river and struggled up the stony path. But the pursuers were close behind. At the top of the bank, the horse halted and turned about fiercely. And then down below, this is on page 214 again now. Go back, he cried, go back to the land of Mordor, and follow me no more. His voice sounded thin and shrill in his own ears. The riders halted, but Frodo had not the power of Bombadil. That's Tom Bombadil, which is a character that is also completely excluded in the films, and that could be a topic of discussion all of itself, but not for this discussion. His enemies laughed at him with harsh and chilling laughter. Come back, they called. To Mordor we will take you. Go back, he whispered. The ring, they cried with deadly voices. And ultimately it's Frodo who says, by Elbereth and Luthien the Fair, said Frodo with the last effort, lifting up his sword, you shall have neither the ring nor me. And the Ring-Wraithers were swept away ultimately by the current of the water. So there you go. That's one significant change in and of itself, where Arwen is nowhere to be seen in that, and it's Frodo who's alone, who is tasked with, stirring up the courage to confront these beasts, even despite his weakness, his injury, his deadly injury, or I should say, his nearly deathly injury, and that's a powerful moment, because it's a powerful moment in the film. The music is playing, and the audience is really in that moment, and the hero would be completely different in that scene, if you could imagine, if it was Frodo alone riding on the white horse rather than Arwen, carrying them forward, carrying them to safety. So that's one big change that I wanted to mention, and I'll get to the second one now. So it's the second one is sort of, there's a few parts to it in a sense. So I'll start later on. This occurs in the Two Towers, because it sort of has ripples effect throughout the story in some way. So this occurs in the Two Towers in the film, and well, it occurs in the novel in the Two Towers. In the film, it occurs in the Two Towers in part, and then also in the Return of the King in some part. So, and you'll see that as I explain it. So, in the book, this is when Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are in pursuit of the orcs who have taken Merry and Pippin, and who are on a non-stop course to take them back to Isengard and Saruman. So, and this part's in both the film and the books. They're in pursuit, and Aragorn realizes that there's another group of people on horseback out there, and this is Eomer, who is Lord of the Mark, loyal to Theoden King, son of Thengel, in Rohan. So they effectively meet on the plains, or near Rohan, or in Rohan, and on page 433, Aragorn says, "First tell me whom you serve. Are you friend or foe of Sauron, the Dark Lord of Mordor?" "I serve only the Lord of the Mark, Theoden King, son of Thengel," answered Eomer. "We do not serve the power of the Black Land far away, but neither are we yet at open war with him. And if you are fleeing from him, then you had best leave this land. There is trouble now in all borders, and we are threatened, but we desire only to be free, and to live as we have lived, keeping our own, and serving no foreign lord, good or evil. We welcome guests kindly in the better days, but in these times the unbidden stranger finds us swift and hard. Come, who are you? Whom do you serve, and whose command do you hunt, orcs in our land?" I serve no man, said Aragorn, but the servants of Sauron I pursue into whatever land they may go. There are few among mortal men who know more of orcs, and I do not hunt them in this fashion out of choice. The orcs whom we pursued, took captive 2 of my friends. In such need a man that has no horse will go on foot, and he will not ask for leave to follow the trail, nor will he count the heads of the enemy save with a sword. I am not weaponless. Aragorn threw back his cloak. The elven sheath glittered as he grasped it, and the bright blade of Andúril shone like a sudden flame as he swept it out. Elendil, he cried, I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and am called Elessar the Elfstone, Dunedain, and heir of Isildur, Elendil, son of Gondor. Here is the sword that was broken and is forged again. Will you aid me or thwart me? Choose swiftly. Gimli and Legolas looked at their companion in amazement, for they had not seen him in this mood before. He seemed to have grown in stature where Eomer had shrunk, and in his living face they caught a brief vision of the power and majesty of the kings of stone. For a moment it seemed to the eyes of Legolas that a white flame flickered on the brows of Aragorn like a shining crown. Eomer stepped back, and a look of awe was in his face. He cast down his proud eyes. These are indeed strange days, he muttered. Dreams and legends spring to life out of the grass. So that's a pretty big difference right there in and of itself, because in the film, they're sort of introduced and they tell them where, what happened, but he doesn't introduce himself in that fashion where he unsheathes his sword, and that's sort of a powerful moment that is shown, more so in the Return of the King, which is Narsil, which is the sword that was broken, and when it's reforged, it's called Andúril. So let's go back now and see, try to track this back down. Back in the novel, page 243, this is the chapter, the Council of Elrond, which is in the Fellowship of the Ring part of the novel. Elrond is explaining, the Elder Days to a certain extent, and he gets to the point where he says, I was the herald of Gil-galad and marched with his host. I was at the battle of Dal-gurlad before the Black Gate of Mordor, where we had the mastery for the spear of Gil-galad and the sword of Elendil, Agelos and Narsil. None could withstand. I beheld the last combat on the slopes of Orndruin, where Gil-galad died and Elendil fell, and Narsil broke beneath him. But Sauron himself was overthrown, and Isildur cut the ring from his hand with the hilt shard of his father's sword and took it for his own. Okay, so that was page 243, and then we get to a point where on page 246, a dream is being explained. I believe this is Boromir, who really has no knowledge of Aragorn, that he's in the presence of Aragorn at this point. But he explains the dream, and it says, page 246, seek for the sword that was broken, and in Meldris it dwells. There shall be counsels taken stronger than Morgul spells. There shall be shown a token that doom is near at hand. For Isildur's bane shall waken, and the halfling forth shall stand. So they're in their council. They're discussing various things that they've encountered, dreams that they've had, and they're trying to figure out what the best course of action is at this point. And in response to what Boromir said, Aragorn said, and here in the house of Elrond more shall be made clear to you, said Aragorn. Standing up, he cast his sword upon the table that stood before Elrond, and the blade was in 2 pieces. Here is the sword that was broken, he said. Then on page 247, Aragorn says the words were not the doom of Minas Tirith, said Aragorn, but doom and great deeds are indeed at hand. For the sword that was broken is the sword of Elendil that broke beneath him when he fell. It has been treasured by his heirs when all their heirlooms were lost. For it was spoken of old among us that it should be made again when the ring, Isildur's bane, was found. So this is another big difference, because in the council, in the films, they don't really discuss any of this. I mean, Aragorn is introduced. Boromir discovers that he's that the Strider is Aragorn, son of Elendil, son of Isildur, who's the son of Elendil. And they don't, in the film, that none of this is really covered. So let me go back once more before I discuss my thoughts on these changes, because this goes back now to page 171. This is chapter called Strider. This is in the Fellowship of the Ring as well. This part is of the book and the film too is when Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin they've made their way to the inn, and they were being followed by the Ringwraiths, and Gandalf is nowhere to be found. They're confused. They don't know who to trust. And they really don't know what the right path forward is. So Gandalf had actually left the innkeeper, Mr. Butterbur, a letter in the novel, which reaches, which he eventually remembers to give to Frodo. This is after he meets Strider, and he doesn't know if he can really trust Strider. Well, he is sort of trusting of Strider, even though he doesn't know who he is, and he doesn't know for certain yet. But he has he has a good feeling about him, I guess, to a certain extent. But it's still mysterious, and the audience kind of gets that. But the letter from Gandalf says, page 170 actually. P.S. Do not use it again. He's referring to the ring because he used it in both the book novel and the film for any reason whatsoever. But I think in the novel it happened differently, and it was more of it wasn't kind of like an accident, like like they caught it in the film. It was sort of that was like a screenshot, or like when the film first came out, it was like the ring slipping on his finger. You don't really get that from the book. It was more of an intentional thing almost, but kind of, sort of. It was in his pocket, and I guess there's some room for interpretation there. But and at any rate, he says, do not use it again, not for any reason whatsoever. Do not travel by night. P.P.S. Make sure that it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. So, okay, and then Strider confirms that with Frodo by effectively repeating this on page 171. All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. Did the verses apply to you then? Asked Frodo. I could not make out what they were about, but how did you know that they were in the Gandalf Cellar if you had never seen it? I did not know. He answered, by him Aragorn, and those verses go with the name. He drew out his sword, and they saw that the blade was indeed broken, a foot below the hilt. Not much use in it, said Sam, said Strider, but the time is near when it shall be forged anew. Okay, so there you go. The culmination of those things go with the second sort of change, and that's really a big change in my opinion, although on the surface it may not seem such, and it's plausible that it was made for the purposes of creating an arc to the film version, when the sword Narsil was forged anew into Anduril, that occurred in the Return of the King in the films, and it was really Arwen who convinced Elrond, her father, that she was going to stay, and this is what she wanted. She wanted to be with Aragorn, and that convinced Elrond to reforge the sword and then to deliver it all the way. I don't know how, the film kind of just, just assumed he made it his way all the way to Aragorn, and before the eve of battle, to give him the sword that was reforged. So again, they're creating a character development for Arwen, and you have to sort of. I asked myself, well, what's the purpose? What is this doing? Is it really plausible that it was done purely at the end, the Return of the King? It makes sense that they put it in the Return of the King, but these two changes that I've gone through, they've come at the advancement of Arwen, a female character, at the expense of Frodo and Aragorn, which are two of the main characters of this novel, and in the novel. And it doesn't advance the theme. It doesn't advance, advance what the core of the story is trying to convey. And the message that it sends is that, Aragorn actually had the blade. It wasn't stored in the films. It's like it was kept in, the elven hands. And it was, sort of representing of the strength of men and the honor of men. And Aragorn didn't even have it in the films, whereas in the books he had it the whole time. He had it from the very beginning. He inherited it pretty much, and it was at the council that they came together and they brought their collective wisdom, what they've been thinking, what they've been dreaming, what they've learned from all across, from various different parts of Middle Earth, and they brought that knowledge together and came to agree that this was the time to reforge the sword. But in the films, it's only reforged because Arwen convinces her father Elrond that she's in love with Aragorn. So those are a couple of the changes that I caught, and again, with respect to the sword and the changes they made with Frodo and Arwen. I'll go back to page 247 where they reference the sword and Aragorn.
Excuse me, are you talking to me?
So on page 247, all that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes of a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. So when and where and how they introduced the sword in the film versus the novel is completely different. It changes how it affects the themes that the story is trying to make, and it does so at the expense of the characters involved. In this respect, Aragorn, and with the first change that I noted, Frodo, but in both instances, it does so in order to develop Arwen's character. And it's a little bit, it's not a little bit, it is ironic, in the sense that these changes were made, because film is a sort of source of power. It tends to be much more attractive to people to go to a film than to read a book. So it represents a source of power in the way that it adapts novels and it interprets text to the big screen. So it's kind of ironic that by adapting a novel whose themes consist of power and corruption and honor and integrity, that it would compromise on those themes for the sake of political agenda or whatever other reason they may try to justify making these changes are. In addition, I'll go back to page 243, where Elrond is at the council of Elrond. Elrond is explaining how the sword was broken, and this they did a good job of, but in the film, in terms of portraying this, where it says, I was at the Battle of Dal-Gurlad, with the Black Gate of Mordor, where we had the mastery for the Spear of Gil-galad and the Sword of Elendil. None could withstand. I beheld the last combat on the slopes of Orodruin, where Gil-galad died and Elendil fell, and Narsil broke beneath him, but Sauron himself was overthrown. And Isildur cut the ring from his hand with the hilt shard of his father's sword and took it for his own. So the sword itself kind of represents the honor and the strength of men, and the sword and the ring act as foils for one another. It's broken, and almost simultaneously Sauron is overthrown. He's not completely defeated, but he's overthrown. And at the same time, the Isildur is corrupted by power. In effect, he's corrupted by the ring. So, and that goes hand in hand with the sword that was broken, his father's sword that was broken. Represents the loss of strength and honor in men. But in the films, the restoration of the sword, the reforging of the sword, and therefore the restoration of honor and strength in men, comes only when Arwen, the love interest of Aragorn, convinces her father Elrond to reforge the sword. Whereas in the novels, Aragorn had the sword the entire time. It wasn't stored away in Rivendell and held by the elves. So it's definitely ironic from a film perspective from the novel, because the film version being a source of great popularity, film in general as being a source of power, it's even as good as an adaptation as the films were. I've watched them many times and I enjoyed them thoroughly, and overall, again, it was thoroughly enjoyable and highly consistent in general with the tone and the themes that were trying to be conveyed, at least in relative terms to many other films. And in particular, the soundtrack was captured the essence of what I think the author was going for. But having said that, these changes represent sort of a corruption on the part of filmmakers in inserting their own agenda in developing a female character at the cost of the main characters, a loss of the main themes of the story, which are power, corruption, honor, and integrity. And so it's definitely ironic that, and I wonder if when they were making it, they realized the internal conflict as a result.